She's sometimes sad, she's sometimes happy. She's doing things to make her life less crappy. Trying a treatment that's new on the scene. Let's sit back and talk about ketamine.
Hey, welcome to Ketamine Insights. Thanks for being here. Today we're going to talk about how to set an intention for a ketamine experience. And we also talk more generally about ways to live a more intentional life, how we might be able to better understand ourselves, and ways to ease up on ourselves a bit when that's what's called for. Hopefully you can find something in there that is helpful. And also, hopefully you don't mind a few swear words, because you'll find those in here for sure. Third, there's a part of this episode where I think I might have been a little confusing. I think my terminology is confusing. At one point, I talk about observing yourself and then, quote, checking in with your values to see whether your behavior and your values are aligned. So to put that a little differently, what I'm trying to say is it's about taking time to find and then investigate your internal contradictions. So one example that I think a lot of people might be able to relate to is when your internal monologue says something mean or treats you in any way that you don't think is how people should be treated. That's an example of your internal behavior not lining up with your values. Basically, anytime that your thoughts or behaviors go against your best interests, that's worth looking into, because I think being curious about that tension can lead to really good insights and hopefully eventually can make you feel a lot better. Finally, part of what we're trying to do with this podcast, with Ketamine Insights, is to fight stigma and to make conversations like this easier for people to have. So toward that end, please do share this podcast with a friend. Thank you so much. Here is episode number 4. Excellent. Okay. Hey, Lynn.
Hey, Molly.
How you doing?
Pretty good. How are you doing?
I'm good.
Good.
Welcome, everybody, to Ketamine Insights. This episode is about intentions and intention setting. So we're just going to get right into it, I guess. Intention setting is it's meant for higher dose lozenges or infusions where you are going to dissociate. And it's a way to kind of prepare yourself and also kind of hone in on what you think might be important psychologically for you at the moment. And at the same time, you are best, sort of my best guidance would be, don't expect the infusion to be entirely about the thing that the intention that you set necessarily. It might be, but it might not be.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense. So it's it's helpful, but it's not a law of the land.
Because you can't control what's going to happen
exactly
during your ketamine experience. You're just setting this intention for what you would like to kind of try to focus on, but you don't know what's going to happen. You can't control it.
Yeah, and
basically.
Especially during the infusion itself.
Mm-hmm.
Later on, it might become obvious to you how your experience related to your intention.
Mm-hmm.
But during the experience, it might not be clear. So I say that mostly to stop you from worrying during the infusion. Oh God, this isn't what I hoped we would be thinking about,
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
Yeah.
It might become obvious later on, which is totally common in my experience anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, kind of step by step for setting intentions, what I do is I like to sit with myself maybe a week beforehand and ask a couple questions that help me delve. And I might choose to think about what is hurting my heart, for example, or what I need help coping with at the moment. And those it might not occur to you right away. It might take a moment to kind of really have to sit with the question in almost a mindfulness practice. I do like to turn to more positive questions sometimes too, like what inspires me. Think about, more future focused things, and that kind of thing. So eventually something will rise to the surface. And if not, I recommend just walking away from it. don't push it. You can't really push psychological insights in my experience.
Yeah. This is really wise of you to think about doing this a week or so in advance. And it seems really organized too.
It's not wise. It's just following directions.
Okay.
So
I was going to say, I feel like that's really organized. I would wait until like the day before or the day of and be like, okay, what am I trying to set my intention?
What's important? Oh, fuck.
Yeah, exactly.
No, and it was enforced for me by my therapist, and I would sit maybe 3 days before the infusion and discuss the intention.
Okay.
We don't really do that anymore, but when I was first starting out, we would do that.
Yeah. Okay.
And so then you kind of have to come up with something, right? Or you'll
and did you have to tell your therapist?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I could have not told him, but
yeah, but this was like the way of kind of making sure you were going like step by step through the process to take full advantage of the infusion.
Yeah, and he would sometimes have a good tip, or he would help me kind of think through it, and
that's cool.
Now I can kind of do it by myself. And so anyway, the steps that I am going to detail here were basically given to me, most of them by him.
Okay.
Or developed over the last couple of years of doing infusions. So this might get a little woo-woo, but I promise it's helpful. For me, it might not be helpful for everybody, but just consider it. And kind of, I would really encourage people to like make it their own. Take this kind of outline and see what works for you and what doesn't. Treat it like a buffet, as they say. Take what you like and leave the other stuff behind. And think about what might, also add things, like not just taking away things, but thinking about what might be helpful for you, what you find calming, and maybe it's journaling, maybe whatever. So anyway, okay, so here we go. Once you got an issue in mind, I try to ask myself, what is at the root of this problem?
So can we back up for just a second, and maybe can you give us just like an example? I think for because listeners may be wondering, like, okay, what is? You don't have to tell us something that maybe was one of your intentions, but what could be an intention, for example?
Yeah, definitely. So one example might be for like trouble feeling safe.
Okay.
I think is something we've touched on in past episodes also. So if you're having trouble feeling safe, it can lead to vigilance. It can a lot of people with PTSD have trouble feeling safe.
Yep.
It's very common for people with depression, with PTSD, and other mental illnesses as well. So if you've recognized that, I think it's a good example in part because it is not obvious always that that's the issue at hand. You might be tense, you might be alert, you might jump at sudden noises, that kind of thing, but it's not clear to you why. And so trouble feeling safe is something you would get to after asking the question, like, what is hurting my heart, or what am I having trouble coping with, and like sitting with it for a while and realizing, oh, the real problem is that I don't feel safe no matter my surroundings, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So then like going forward so if you've got that idea, then like it's time to ask yourself, like, what is at the root of this problem? Which is a big question, and it might be daunting. So what I've done, and this is where it maybe gets a little weird, is what I like to do, and I made this up. This isn't from my therapist or anything like that. It's like, I kind of have a little conversation with myself. So I pretend that I'm a benevolent older person, like an aunt or an older friend or something like that. And I think to myself, like, what would they say to me about this issue?
Yeah.
And first of all, I think in a lot of cases, this is helpful because an older, like, close person or wiser person, maybe not older necessarily, but I like to think of people who are calmer than me when I imagine this conversation. And she'll first, like, generally in my mind, when I have this conversation, she comforts me first. So she'll say something like, you might not feel safe, and that's not your fault.
Yeah.
You didn't mess up in any way to make yourself feel this way. And that often these coping strategies that are difficult now did emerge for some reason.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not in the wrong. This is just what's happening in your mind. And then what would you tell your best friend who is having the same problem?
Yeah.
Like in a lot of cases, we're harder on ourselves than we are on the people around us.
Yeah.
Right. Or like there's a negative voice in your head that's much harder on you than you would be to someone else.
How can you say it in a way that's like really kind? How can you be kind and compassionate to yourself about this?
Right.
Instead of
and
being
what
harsh to
advice
yourself.
would they, like what exactly? So like, what if you don't feel safe? Like, how does that express itself in your life?
Mm-hmm.
And you just kind of like sit around. For me, like I just like to sit around and explore this question.
Mm-hmm.
So now that I realize that I don't feel safe, like what does that mean in my everyday life? And also what can I do to feel safe? Either sometimes by addressing the original issue that maybe made you not feel safe, but often the thing that caused the problem is so long ago that it's kind of like, as they say, like overcome by events. Like there's kind of not a lot you can do to fix that thing that happened to you that makes you not feel safe anymore.
Yeah.
So it's more about like looking around the world today and saying like, what's real? Like what threats am I facing? And this is the kind of conversation that I have with this older relative or friend, is to say like, so are there things that are not safe right now? And what can you do to protect yourself? And you're just kind of like bringing the conversation into an intellectual place. And then checking in with your values and saying like, is that true? Is that right? That kind of thing. So it's like a back and forth kind of meditating on the problem. Does that make sense?
Kind of.
Yeah.
So that's the process. This is the process you go through yourself a few days before an infusion or a high dose lozenge as you're getting to your intention.
Yeah. So basically what I'm trying to do with this conversation with a friend is to better understand from a compassionate place what I'm struggling with.
Yeah. Okay.
So, and when I say check in with my values, like often what it means basically is like not blaming yourself for it or not like another thing that like staying with this theme of like trouble not feeling safe is like, your underlying understanding of are people out to get you or not. And often that's another thing that like your thoughts and your internal monologue and your values might not go along with each other. So this happens to me all the time. Like I'll think to myself, this person is probably going to be mad if they come over and my dishes aren't done. They're going to think terribly of me. And it's like, actually, if I think about what that person will think, it's just not true, right? But I have that voice in my head saying like, they're going to judge you. They're going to judge you. You better not do this because they're going to judge you. Yeah. And so that's what I mean about checking in with your values. It's like a matter of like going back and forth between like what you think is true and what you kind of act like is true.
Yeah. Okay.
On a more visceral level.
Okay.
And just kind of like becoming familiar in your own mind with like how you think the world is and how you're acting like the world is. And kind of like just familiarizing yourself in that way with the problem that you're facing.
Okay.
And then once I've done that in like an environment that I try to create for myself that's very like comforting and understanding and tender, then it's time to set the intention itself. And for me, like the wording doesn't matter. Some people prefer to have a question. I try to get mine down to like 3 words maximum, because otherwise I don't remember during the infusion what my intention is. I can't think straight.
So like for this trouble feeling safe. So trouble feeling safe could be the 3-word intention right there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Other options for that same question or intention might be like, am I safe? Or just show me safety.
Okay.
Or even like just plain safety.
Yeah.
And kind of rolling it around in your head. Sometimes during an infusion, there's just like almost like a moment of like where nothing's happening kind of. And then that's the moment when you can touch back and just say safety.
Yeah. Okay. Because when it's just this simple 1, 2, or 3 words, it's like it's sort of there with you on the tip of your tongue or tip of your brain, as you're in that place, and you could just call on it.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
And it's a way of like kind of gently guiding the infusion as opposed to trying to like dictate where it goes.
And do you find that generally your infusion experiences are pretty guided by those intentions, or do they stray quite a bit, or does it really, really differ?
Yeah, I'd say for me, it differs quite a lot. Because the integration sessions happen right after the infusion, sometimes the intention will guide the integration session almost more than it guides the infusion necessarily. Or sometimes, depending on your dose and your tolerance, you might not remember much of the infusion experience itself. In which case, it's hard to know. You might emerge with like a more of a sensation or a feeling about what happened and not really a story. You know, it's not like, oh, and then I saw my grandmother, and then I was like going through a tunnel, and then I was in a jungle, and then like, no, it's more just like, wow, I feel really satisfied, and I'm just kind of thinking about my mom or whatever, you know?
Yeah.
And so then often, if I can't remember much of the infusion experience, then when I'm talking to my therapist, either immediately after or even a day or two after the infusion, I might end up talking a lot about the intention because that's what I've been pondering for the last week.
Yeah.
It's kind of hard to know for sure if the infusion experience had much to do with it or not sometimes if I can't remember.
Yeah. But the intention setting definitely makes you focus on what that intention was. Regardless of whether like the infusion experience ended up being focused on that intention or not, like your mind has been focused on it. On the intention.
And like I find that the insights that I gain in that conversation with this like older relative is very they're very helpful. It's like I realize the contradictions in my own thinking. And then I think a lot of what ketamine does, to kind of zoom out a little bit, what ketamine does for me often is help me move things that I understand to be true in my brain. Basically, it moves them for me to know that they're true in my heart, if that makes sense.
So say it again. So things that you understand to be true in your brain.
Yeah, kind of like intellectually, I know it to be true. But after an infusion, if I kind of ponder the problem and then have the infusion, at the end of the infusion, I'll know that it's true, like in my heart. Yeah. As opposed to just in my brain.
It to be true.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah. So like a different example maybe than the safety one is to say like, and this is something that really happened to me, was like the issue of like just believing that you're a good person.
Yeah.
Like I know in my head, like I don't generally hurt people. I try not to anyway, you know, like I know that I'm fine. I'm an okay person.
Yeah. I think that's true.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you. But then there are, you know, I have doubts and I don't necessarily treat myself like I know that's true deep down. And so, and I like, I take blame for things as if like an accidental negative consequence was because I was a bad person. You know what I mean? Like you find fault with yourself maybe too much, especially when you're suffering from depression. You tend to blame yourself for things that aren't your fault. So I had an infusion where I saw myself kind of from the viewpoint of a friend of mine from graduate school who like wasn't a very, very close friend. We got along really well. We used to like have fun dancing together at parties in graduate school. I kind of saw myself from his point of view, and I thought the way he looked at me, like it was fine. Molly's fine. She's good. She's great. Yeah, whatever. It's fine.
Yeah. She's not a bad person.
Yeah, exactly. You don't, the sensation was like, not only am I acceptable, but that's the end of the story. You don't have to keep looking for problems. Okay. She's satisfactorily acceptable and fine and good person, right? Yeah. And it was just this incredible like satisfaction with that answer that was almost more overwhelming than the feeling of being a good person was just like the finality of it.
Yeah.
You're a good person. You know that to be true. It is truly true. I think it's true. You should think it's true. It's true. The world accepts it as true. You know, it felt like that.
Yeah. Okay. So there you go. Signed, sealed, delivered.
Mm-hmm.
There it is.
Final answer.
Yeah. And so now you know that in your brain and in your heart, and that's what you live with.
Yeah. I felt much more confident.
Anymore.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And there are times when I still do, but I feel more confident about it than I did before that infusion.
Yeah.
It was a powerful experience for me. I came out of it going like, oh, yeah. Uh-huh.
Cool. That's amazing.
Like knowing it was right.
Yeah. And had you set your intention on that before the infusion? On this question
honestly,
of are you a good person?
I don't remember.
Okay.
I would have to go back and look at my notes. I don't know if that's something that I put forward as a problem that I was facing, or if it's something that like we were saying before, kind of like the medicine and like your own kind of spirit are able to work together to say like, you need this kind of nourishment.
Yeah. Yeah. It just
Which
came
sounds
up
absurd, but it's like, yeah, your psyche wants to heal.
Yeah.
Like, just
absolutely.
like your body wants to heal. Like your
sounds
psyche
like it
wants
was something that was there that you'd been questioning, that you'd been struggling with. And so even if it hadn't been like your main intention you were focusing on, it was there, and it was something that you were dealing with.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting.
And to me, that's the beauty of like kind of letting go during the infusion itself, is you're able to see things that maybe you don't even know to make an intention. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. They come up. You weren't focusing on them. That you didn't know that like these are the main things I need to work on. These are the main things that are hurting my heart or holding me back, but they're there. Yeah. You're letting go because this medicine is helping you to release, dissociate. And so these things are coming up and you're having these experiences that are like coming out of your deep psyche. Right? That's what I imagine.
Yeah. And the other helpful thing is that like during the integration session, especially if it's close, basically if it's within the 72 hours after the ketamine infusion itself, then your mind is more elastic.
Okay.
And like we were saying before about like doing therapy while doing a lozenge, when you're coming out of an infusion, your mind is just working differently.
Yeah. That's cool.
So if you're having a conversation about the intention immediately after ketamine, that's a whole nother benefit. Whether or not the infusion, you can remember it, or whether or not it focused on the same thing or whatever, you're talking about something that you've spent a week kind of like really pondering in yourself. And you're talking about it in a context where like your brain literally is more creative and able to see connections that you didn't see before.
Yeah.
So you're able to think like, oh, not only can I like cope with it differently in this context of coming out of a ketamine infusion, but also I can see what it does in my life more easily than I could when I was sober, basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's a very, very useful exercise as well.
Yeah. That's amazing. It's like your brain and your heart are somehow more elastic or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Really cool.
And there have been studies, I think I've seen studies on psilocybin and creativity.
Okay.
And I've definitely seen it in my life with ketamine.
Oh yeah. Well, it's like, they say, there's like people in tech are doing like microdosing, right? Of psilocybin, right? To be more creative and like have breakthroughs.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
and it's true in therapy
too.
Yes, totally.
Yeah.
There are times when I'll do a lozenge and I'll start writing.
Yeah. Cool.
Half an hour after. And like, you just like, like things flow in a different way.
I bet.
So I've never tried microdosing, but it makes sense to me that it would kind of help you. Yeah. Like they say, see connections. And
absolutely.
Think outside the box, I guess, is another way to put it.
Yeah. Yeah, it changes the way you can see things. So one thing I was thinking with the topic of intention setting that, kind of my experience with intention setting and what maybe some listeners may relate to is thinking about yoga class. That was when we say intention setting, it's like kind of my main experience with intention setting is like when you're going into a yoga class, and I don't know if you've done this, and sometimes the teacher will say at the beginning, as you're getting started, or maybe after you've warmed up, okay, set your intention, take a moment, as you're breathing in and out, and set an intention for this class, and sometimes they'll say, maybe it's just one word, and it's like a very quick moment. And usually it's not something where you've been thinking about it for days going into the class, and obviously in a yoga class, you're, stone cold sober and everything, but depending on how into it you get, you can sometimes be transported into another place. And I've had some good yoga classes where I can be, some where I'm not at all. But I like it when a teacher says, set an intention. And sometimes when I'm really into that yoga class, I definitely I like that moment when I'm really into it, I'm really feeling it. And I kind of set that intention and I kind of focus on it. I really do enjoy that. And sometimes I feel a little rushed, like, oh gosh, I hadn't been thinking about this and what's my intention, and I'm thinking like next time I got to think about it in advance, and so I was, as you were saying, like, yeah, your therapist told you to think about it a few days in advance. Like, that's a good idea. And I feel like I should think about that before I go into a yoga class or a meditation or a therapy session or whatever it is. It's good to be organized. But I think, maybe other listeners have had that experience in yoga. And I know for me, it's often like, it's just something like relax, let go, release, something fairly basic. It's kind of like why you go into yoga, right? Maybe it's connection, but it's just sort of about, but it's like, rather than just being there in yoga and focusing on my pose, it's like, oh yeah, okay. I'm like, for a moment when I'm setting that intention, I'm really like, okay, as I'm breathing in, I'm like, okay, what is this intention? And I'm saying maybe it's breathe, relax, connect, release or something. And I'm really taking a moment to more deeply think it through and like, why am I really here? And
that's
feeling
exactly
what's
what I
going
was
on.
about to say. Yeah. It's like, it kind of, the way you describe it, I think it applies really well to a ketamine intention too. Is like, it helps you think about why you're really here. Like what's the purpose of this? Yeah.
You didn't just show up. You're not just showing up and just sort of sitting there and going through the motions. It's like you're really checking in. And I think that's helpful. And even like in a yoga class, it's helpful even if you're just doing that for a second and you're thinking it through. And then maybe when you're, at the end of the yoga class again, you're checking in again with that intention. I think it is helpful to do that. And so I imagine if for something that's much more intense, like a ketamine infusion, having that intention that you've thought through well in advance, that is more help, that's really helpful. And that can really intensify the experience and make it more rewarding to have
do you
set
feel
something.
like with a yoga class where you've like set an intention during, at the beginning of the class, do you feel like if it's, say it's rest or release or something like that, would you say you feel more rested at the end of that yoga class than you would had you not set the intention? Or like, is there a consequence usually at the end of it, or does it feel more satisfying? Or what do you think is the difference between a yoga class with the intention and without?
I think sometimes, I know sometimes I'll go into a yoga class, and I will say I haven't been doing yoga classes like in person where I've done this kind of thing in a while, but I did go through a phase where I was doing some where with, like good teachers that would say set an intention, and, mostly pre-pandemic. So it's been a while. But I know, sometimes I would go into a class, and particularly if they didn't say set an intention, often I would just sort of be like, going through the motions, and, your brain can easily get very distracted, and maybe you're kind of losing your focus, and you're like looking at what others are doing, you're thinking self-critical thoughts, or you're getting annoyed with the teacher or whatever. I find it like easier to get distracted when you're not you haven't set an intention and you're not focused on yourself. And I feel like often for me, when I make a yoga practice, whether I'm doing it on my own or I'm in a class, when I make it a little bit more spiritual and a little more focused and a little bit more about an intention, it's much more focused, and it's a better practice for me. And so when I do set an intention, even if it's just, it's just one word, and I've just sort of said it at the beginning of the class or the beginning of the practice, it is a better experience for me. And even though I like rarely go into a yoga practice saying like, oh, I'm going to do this. When I do think to do it or someone tells me to do it, it definitely ends up being better because I focus more.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Like, I think another way to describe it, you're not like striving toward the intention throughout the experience, whether it's a yoga class or an infusion. It's almost like you're resting in that idea.
Yeah.
Of safety or of rest, release, whatever it is. Like, you're kind of like letting it be the background to your experience.
Yeah.
And that somehow like provides a sense of purpose or like a richness to the experience.
Yeah. I think that's right. It makes sense. And it makes me think, you know, we could probably do more intention setting and other kinds of experiences in our lives too.
I remember one yoga class, like, yeah, exactly. The first, I might have been the first yoga class I ever went to. I was taking care of my grandmother full time, and she was terminal. She had cancer. And I went to a yoga class, and the woman at the beginning, the instructor said, give yourself permission to just be here for the next hour. And I had been completely consumed sitting in that class as we were getting ready to start with, you know, feelings of guilt, not being with my grandmother, wondering how she was doing at this very moment. And I completely was not present at all. And and that's exactly what I needed to hear. And I think that like, it like helps you, even if it's just one bit of permission like that to help you be present. Like setting an intention to be present almost is exactly what that is, right? Like and giving yourself permission to kind of go there or like have a reason, have a purpose, I think you're right. Like in general, it's helpful to be intentional, right? We get more out of most experiences.
I think we do. Otherwise our minds are all over the place. We're not focused and we're feeling guilt and we're feeling all kinds of different things. Yeah. It's funny how we have to give ourselves permission and we have to thank ourselves. We have to celebrate ourselves and we have to set intentions for ourselves. Yeah. I know. I feel like the older I'm getting, the more I'm learning. Yeah. How I need to treat myself. Like you said, I need to treat myself like I'm like a wise older person might treat me instead of like how I naturally want to treat myself.
Yeah, they say like, I think it's a common practice to like write a letter to your younger self in like different therapy and coaching things. Yeah. I think it's fun like to write a letter to your current self from an older self.
That's a good idea. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Like what does 60-year-old Molly think of my current situation? She's going to be like, dude, calm down. It doesn't matter.
Yeah. I love that. It's a great idea.
And it's not bad advice. Like,
yeah.
So anyway, I guess that brings us to the end of this episode. I guess I just want to emphasize again that like, this is a practice to make your own. Yep. And the idea is like to just help you figure out what's important in your life at the time. And like we were saying, rest in that idea before the infusion and then just kind of see what happens.
Yeah.
So
cool.
I hope that's helpful. Thanks so much, Lynn.
All right. Thank you, Molly. Thanks for sharing. Super interesting stuff.
Okay, that was our episode. And these are our credits. Our hosts are Lynn Schneider and me, Molly Dunn. I don't know exactly what all is involved in producing a podcast, but I'm pretty sure that's what I'm doing. I do know for sure that our theme song is by Solid State Symphony. If you want to go deeper into this topic, I highly recommend a podcast called Psychedelic Therapy Frontiers. They have an episode called How to Prepare for a Psychedelic Journey. We'll link to it in the show notes. It's really good. In that episode, they suggest that we think of an intention as a, quote, loosely held hope, unquote, which I think is really great. And finally, please take a moment to forward this show to someone excellent, someone hilarious, someone who makes really good fashion choices. If they listen this far, they'll be complimented. And word of mouth is how we grow. Thanks so much. See you next week. Hey, it's Molly and we're recording. You know how we do. Make it good every time.